Okay, so my name's Dom. I'm September 2012, and I don't want to make this last too long because it's already 5:30, and we all want to go to the pub. So basically, I'm just going to fire into it. So why am I standing up here, and why am I talking about economics? Because economics is pretty boring, and I'm going to do a speech for 15 minutes or maybe 5 on why I like economics. So basically, the reason I'm here is because Dara strong-armed me into it and made me do a speech. And if you don't know Dara, you can see him at the back there. He's got very strong arms, very manly physique all round. So I had no choice. And similar to Joshua, I thought to myself, right, okay, the guys that did the TED Talks last time were pretty inspirational characters. So we had, well, we'll talk about them in a second, but Joshua said that he didn't know, he didn't have any inspiration, and he wasn't an expert in anything, but he clearly has 3 friends that are inspirational. I lack that also. I don't know anyone remotely inspirational, no offence guys. I just had me, and I had nothing to talk about basically. So I was thinking about the talks that they did last time, and there was a common theme that came up. So the first 3 guys that got up, we had Anne, and we had Ranesh and Jay, and the 3 of them had one similar sort of theme, which was that they all used to hit the bevy pretty hard. And I thought, well, I can relate to that. And then the 4th guy, I actually forget his name, so apologies if you're here. But the guy that was speaking about neuroscience, which was also very good, he was a sort of, he talked about an academic subject matter. And I thought, well, I actually used to get really bevied and then got interested in economics. And kind of stopped bevying a wee bit, or as much. And that is basically the idea for my talk. Thanks very much. I was kidding. So, big clap. It's a wee bit more than that, I'm afraid. Okay, so basically, the first shock to any of you guys here is, how could you possibly stop getting bevied because of economics? It's a ridiculous concept. And the second shock, for those of you that went to Latimer that were on my intake, is how could this gentleman in front of you be a bevier in a past life? Because as you all know, I'm the most sensible man in the room. Robert, am I not?
Very much so.
Correct. Okay, so that was the boring part. Oh yeah, we've got pictures. This is the proof that I used to be a bevy merchant. So here we go. Look at this one here. Defiling the national dress, drinking in the streets, wearing a wig. This is disgusting. And this one here, you can see a chap here. That is what my friends thought of me at the time. He's not my friend, but you know, what's going on there? By this stage, I was eating ice cream topless with no cutlery, and that's when things got really bad. So if you think that this is all made up for the sake of it, no, it was in a bad way. But economics saved me somehow. So basically, here's how it all started. So I used to study medicine when I first went to uni. I don't know why I did it, but I had a lot of doctors in the family, and I kind of thought to myself, right, let's do medicine. And then failed medicine in 3rd year because I was getting bevied. And I don't know how many times I'm going to say bevy in this talk, but quite a lot. But I didn't really realise at the time what had gone wrong, why I failed my 3rd year exam. And I can see now that it was basically a misdirection, and it was the fact that I wasn't flexible and agile with change, which I should have been. But I wasn't. I didn't work for PwC at the time, so it was fine. But what I did after I dropped out was I did another degree in sports medicine, and then I reapplied to go back and study medicine, which was that. And I went to see this guy, who was the head of the course at the time. He's an absolute legend. And I said, Ron, can I get a reference on reapplying to do medicine? And he said to me, actually quite an inspirational quote, he said, why do you want to be a doctor? And I said, well, that's a good question. I want to do some good in the world, that must be it. You know, I want to come home from work and I want to feel good and feel that I help people. And he said, well, how can you do more good in the world? Is it by curing patients one at a time, or is it maybe by getting involved in policy and helping things that will help lots of people? So for example, well, he was right, screening everyone aged 50 or over for bowel cancer can cause a 60% reduction in deaths. That's quite a lot. And there was research that was released in January of this year that showed that over 50 years, the US's anti-smoking policy, so everything they've done, whether it's adverts, right through to nicotine patches or whatever else it is, they reckon they saved 8 million lives in 50 years. Now over the normal sort of 50-year span of a doctor's career, they're probably not going to save that much. So I thought to myself, he's got a point. Maybe I should, you know, I'm not going to get in anyway because I've been chucked out, so it's not going to happen. So maybe I should take Ron's advice and try and think something about policy. But yeah, so that was the idea. So basically I was right, let's get involved in some sort of policy. So then I thought to myself, I don't know anything about policy, about politics, about anything. I never did politics, history, modern studies, anything. I did physics and chemistry and geography, and I knew nothing. And then I started reading like the FT and The Economist and like watching Question Time and stuff. And I was like, what are they talking about? I didn't have a clue. Honestly, it was a different language to me. And I kind of realised that you have to be engaged in politics at all, you have to know two things. You have to know history, because if you want to make a policy, you want to make a different policy, you kind of have to know if someone's tried it before and if it works. And you also have to speak a different language. I did not get the language at all. There was all stuff like liberals and libertarians. What's the difference? I didn't know. Neoconservatives. What's the other? Even the definition of a socialist, which you think, well, that's quite, he's a socialist. But it's changed so much over the past 50 years that I didn't have a clue. And then the whole ites and isms, Blairites, Thatcherites, Marxists, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I don't know if this is just me. I mean, do you guys find that confusing, anyone? Or is that just... Yeah? See, I still find it confusing. But I sort of thought about this and I was like, what's wrong with you? And I remember my dad used to tell me when I was young that I was autistic. And I thought, and I was like, thanks, Dad. But he based this purely because I used to hide underneath tables at family parties and stuff. And I don't think that's a sign of autism. I think that's a sign of everyone's boring and I'm just going to chill out with my Game Boy. But I do, if I'm honest with myself, I probably am a wee bit autistic, somewhere in the spectrum. And I think it's basically I can't deal with these grey concepts. It's got to be either black or white. Something should have a meaning. I just would like it if things made sense. So taking that on, politics wasn't really for me. So I thought, okay, economics. And basically, at the time that I was getting involved in this was the financial crisis that just happened. And economics was all the rage. Everyone was talking about quantitative easing and fiscal stimulus and monetary hawks and all this sort of thing. And I didn't know what they meant, but then once I started reading about it, I was like, that makes a wee bit more sense, because at least you can look at inflation expectations and you can say, well, they've done a big survey and people think inflation is going to be such and such. And I found that a wee bit more interesting. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the point that I was trying to make was that economics is a way for autistic people to sort of rationalise politics and to make policy and say, here's the consequences of what you're going to do. Okay, you can do this, but it's going to have this effect, and here's the sort of analysis we've done. Blah, blah, blah. So, I have a certain view in politics. A lot of people in this room in London Bridge probably won't agree with me, and I'm sort of left-leaning. But I don't think that my left-leaning views are because I am a lefty. All right, I don't think my views in politics define my views in economics. I think the analysis that I've seen in economics define my views in politics, and that's why I have sort of left-wing views. If things change, I'll probably switch like a traitor. But I've just got a few little examples that I wanted to give, and this is the boring part of the talk, but this is why I find economics interesting, because it makes you think about things and go, right, that's interesting. So, first of all, I stayed up after midnight last night and the ONS released a wee report, so I thought I'd put some slides in. I don't know if that's like, yeah, there we go. So, for example, right now, all you hear about is we're in the 5th quarter of successive growth, so things are all back to normal, it's all great. And this is a comparison that the ONS did of 4 of the biggest recessions of recent times, and the one at the bottom is us. So that's real GDP levels. As you can see, it's been a pretty terrible recession. So when you talk about things are back to normal, growth is back, I don't really think it is. I think we're starting to get there, but I really don't think that's a big improvement, and I certainly don't think that the coalition's plan that they say is doing well is really doing well at all. And what's more, I think that something else could have been done, and that could have helped. But number 2, so that's real GDP, but this is real GDP per capita. So if you actually look at what's happened, all that's happened is we've gained more people into the country. So our population's increased, and that's increased the GDP. So if you actually look at what's happened, it's a flat line. And yet we're hearing all this triumphant talk from the coalition, which I don't agree with. And then number 3, if any of you think this cost of living crisis is a buzzword, it's clearly not. Again, last 2 recessions, and wages maybe went down for a bit. This is us, quarter 21, where we are now. And growth in wages has been pretty much below zero for the whole time. So anyone that thinks that the cost of living crisis is just a nonsense phrase, and it is repeated a bit too much, but there is some value in it, there is something real. Some of the next slide is... Oh, it's this guy, okay. So, this is kind of what it all comes down to. So Keynes was the man who, back in the 1930s, you all probably know who Keynes is, but basically Again, he's often pigeonholed by the right as if he was some sort of lefty trade unionist. Actually, he was from a very rich upbringing. He went to Cambridge. He was a stock investor. He made millions from stocks, and he was a very intelligent man. But what he did was he developed frameworks in a book in 1936 called The General Theory, which no one had thought of at the time. And because they analysed what was happening in the economy in a way that hadn't been thought about before, he fundamentally changed politics and economics. And he fundamentally, for about 50 years, got us into a state where government was trusted to run an economy and where the economy actually did pretty well. And these are just two things that I don't want to go into in a lot of detail, but the two things there, the multiplier, which you'll have probably heard about, and the paradox of thrift, which you might not have, are two things that he came up with in the general theory, and they really did fundamentally change economics. So the multiplier effect is quite simple. Basically, if you spend £1 of money in the economy, how much is that actually increasing GDP? Now, usually it's over 1, and so it depends on the time. So, for example, if Barclays spends 10 million on us, that goes into our salaries, then we pay our landlords, then they pay plumbers, and etc., and it goes on. So every pound that's not saved becomes spending, and blah blah blah. The economy gets bigger. But that wasn't something that anyone really thought about at the time. The multiplier is quite an abstract concept, but it does justify spending. Government spending in times of austerity has bigger multipliers. So therefore, you would say, actually, where we were back here, why are we not having a wee bit more spending at this stage? And there was arguments against that, which I've not put in the presentation, but they were nonsense. And I'll talk to anyone about them afterwards if you want. So that was the multiplier effect. The second thing is the paradox of thrift. And that's a very similar idea. So this thing, honestly, if you want to read anything in economics, you should read this article on the Capitol Hill babysitting co-op. It's basically a parable. What happens is you've got 150 rich people on Capitol Hill, and they all want people to look after their kids. So they decide instead of paying young ladies, they're going to just do it all themselves. So if you're sitting and babysitting your kids on a Saturday night, it makes sense that you take another couple's children and blah blah blah. So they thought, right, well, we don't want people to be sort of taking the here. I'm on camera, so I can't swear. So we have to have a fair way of making sure that everyone does their fair share. So they issued coupons. So each coupon was worth an hour of babysitting time, and you would give the coupons to the couple that looked after your kids, and they would give you them back in return. And basically they created an economy. But what happened eventually was, so the idea was that over time, people would do some nights out and some nights in, and it would all even itself out. But over time, people started thinking, right, I'm going to save up coupons so that when I really want to go out for a few days, I'll have loads of coupons left. I'm just going to have a wee reserve. And then, of course, that became a cycle, because then there was less in supply, and people started thinking, right, I'm going to save up some coupons. And then coupons were very hard to come by, and you couldn't get a babysitter. So essentially, they were in a recession in this babysitting economy. And it's honestly one of the best examples of an actual economy that I've ever heard, and you should read that article. And what they had to do eventually was print more coupons. So they just put more coupons into circulation. Everything was fine and dandy, and that's Keynes. So the paradox of thrift says that if everyone saves at the same time in an economy, then the economy goes into recession. And Angela Merkel doesn't seem to get this, but that's something that I was going to say. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, what she's saying is that everyone in the Eurozone has to save and impose austerity. And if everyone does it at the same time, the Eurozone all trades with each other, so their economies are all in attack, which they have done. I don't want to go on for too long, because that's already probably bloody. Sorry. For the US guys, gosh darn it, sorry about that. So basically, third one, and this is one I feel passionate about, but I'm not going to go into it because it's a bit boring, but the point is, you can take an argument such as the case for independence, and you can use economics to analyse it. Now there's a few things here. Optimal currency area theory basically says if a country has got lots of flow of labour between it, lots of trade, Scotland and England do 70% of Scotland's imports and exports are with England, blah blah blah, then they should be one country. But if those two economies diverge, as the nationalists want, then you're no longer an optimal currency area, so you should have a different currency, but they want to keep the currency. So there's one, Dutch disease is an argument that if you have a country that's small and open and it becomes a petrol currency, so if they start getting lots of revenue from oil, then their currency soars and their manufacturing base goes because exports are too expensive, blah blah blah. So the point that I'm not going to go into this, the point that I'm making is economics can be used, economic theory can be used to actually talk about real issues. And I didn't know what that meant before, and I find that having a framework like that has actually helped me out to kind of work out what's going on in life, apart from in this presentation. But we're almost there. I think this is the last slide. Okay, so why do I like economics? 3 reasons. Number 1, you can use it to understand the world and to understand arguments. Number 2, you can use it to win arguments. And number 3, if you don't win the argument, you can put up a slide of, oh, not him, of Father Ted making a funny quote. And basically the point is, if you don't win the argument, you can just say lots of kind of buzzwords and stuff and people won't really know what you're talking about. And just to finish off, you're probably thinking to yourself, what's he doing? What's he talking about? He's not an economist, he's a management consultant. And I would say, well, that's kind of true, but at the same time, every little job that we do is kind of like a wee mini economy. All you're taking is a problem with a client or whatever it is, and you're using analysis and you're thinking about it and you're solving it. And if we could just do that on a bigger scale, then we would all be amazing and the world would be better. And that's that.